Andrew, thank you very much for taking the time today out of your schedule to talk about your training and kind of your experience with the Momentum program over the last few months. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, your goals with lifting.
I'm Andrew. I'm an engineer of sorts. I've moved to Vancouver about 6 years ago, actually 6 years ago as of yesterday. And I predominantly do CrossFit. A lot of my heavy lifts, the powerlifting movements were struggling due to, I guess, like a lot of lack of knowledge about them, lack of comfort and avoiding doing them. And I was looking at whether I wanted to go into competing for CrossFit, and I basically didn't want to get utterly humiliated in doing back squats, deadlifts, and stuff when competing, basically. So yeah, those were my goals. I got put in touch with yourself, obviously, via one of my friends, who's another client of yours as well, who highly recommended you. And yeah, and that's where it all kind of started.
Perfect. Yeah. So one of the big problems that you were having with your squat and your deadlift training initially was that it seemed like almost every time you wanted to pull heavy, you have a low back problem, or you'd have to book a physio visit or something like that, right?
Yes, that's correct. So I probably understated the amount of issues that I was having and why I was avoiding them. Basically, when I was younger, I had, I think it was like 2 bulging discs and a protruding disc in my spine. And it caused a lot of back issues for a lot of things going ahead. Through work, I managed to get back into general exercise, but with movements that were very back intensive or body intensive at the heavier weights, it was always causing me to have more and more issues with them. I would be doing, honestly, not a very heavy deadlift. I mean, like, it would be even 225 or 205 or something for a deadlift could easily send me back into the physio for like every week or 2 weeks for like 2 or 3 months. So it was something that I was really avoiding because, and not really addressing, because those injuries would just absolutely ruin my training schedules, basically. So I would be out, unable to do pretty much anything for like at least a week or 2, and then unable to do anything even remotely heavy for like another 2 months after that. So yeah, like that was like the issues that I was facing. And like same again for back squat. I was just have like back issues, some hip issues as well, pretty much like entirely back, and similar thing would happen. So anytime it would come to training, I would modify down. I would basically treat it as cardio. So I'm a fairly big dude. So when people see me doing just like back squats, when it's like a heavy back squat day and it's like 135 pounds, they kind of look at me sideways. So it was definitely something that I needed to kind of address, to say the least.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's been really interesting seeing just the progression you made from, just like you said, basically not being able to lift anything appreciable without ending up at a physio, and then that whole cycle of, don't really lift a little bit, blow something out, get frustrated by it, don't really want to do it, never really progress, and then that threshold always stays super low for what you can do, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it was something that I was like thinking about and putting off. Like, I knew I had to do something about it like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and it was just always, I'll get around to it later. So yeah, and it's very good to be able to do something without actually having to worry about how I'm going to feel tomorrow. So
yeah, totally. I mean, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but like, I remember the first time we really programmed some heavy pulls and you got into, well over 3 plates, and you're like, it was really nice not having to go to physio today. And I pulled heavy yesterday, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it was stuff that was like well above my limits. And honestly, I still feel like on the day, I still have some of the psychological drag, which I'm coming to terms with, but it definitely doesn't feel like a physiological one. So it's hard to override 10 years worth of conditioning of these exercises will hurt you, but it's getting there. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, perfect. So yeah, and just to kind of let everyone know, like, framework wise, what we used for a process, right? So we obviously started out with an assessment just to get an idea on where your limitations were, what was maybe more of a trigger for your back, what could we play with safely, and ultimately find our entry point, right? Yep. The other big hurdle that, or I suppose thing I had to take into consideration with your training was that the coaching that we do is a portion of your workouts over the course of a week, but you also do
That's right.
CrossFit quite regularly.
Yep.
And there's a lot of other workout, ultimately volume in your week. And so managing fatigue in terms of how much extra stuff we're adding in versus, trying to just have everything in the program that I would have if I did 100% of your training, for example,
Yep.
was something to consider when we started. And so trying to be specific, make sure we're not, adding in a bunch of fluff where, it might work, it might not, but at the expense of time, we can't be having everything, right?
Yep.
So managing fatigue being one of the big things we did. And then from there, basically we laid out a new groundwork for you to work from. So started with the breathing mechanics for you, getting you to kind of understand rib and hip and core position and diaphragmatic breathing and feeling that expansion that
Yep.
really helped to seem to basically help you get more abdominal pressure, stabilize your spine, and protect your back in those heavy lifts, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then from there, it was really a matter of just taking those base skills and transferring them out to the lifts, right? So starting out with lifts that are a little easier to control and building up towards back squat, deadlift, and grading the exposure and progressively lifting a little bit heavier. And now we're at a point where, I mean, we've tested well above 3 plates on your deadlift. We've been well over 2 plates on squats, and we're at the point where our focus is kind of twofold. So one is obviously just getting stronger, which was the overarching goal, right?
Yep.
And then the second was effectively like future-proofing things, or I should say bulletproofing things. So rounding out some extra pieces. So getting a little bit more hip stability, building up the glutes a little bit more, things that are going to protect the lower back, and building muscular endurance in those too, which is really, really useful. I found with lifters who've had a lot of those like persistent low back issues for a long time, in terms of, if you think about some of the clusters we've done for bear holds and planks and stuff, and basically building endurance so that your core and your brace is not the first thing that gives out in a squat. It's going to be your legs, which is ideal, really.
Yeah, which is, I mean, if you've watched my week video, it's just gone. I was a little fatigued, but yeah, my legs were definitely the first thing that came out. So so no, that's it's definitely, it definitely feels like a much safer way than of hitting the higher numbers than what I was doing before, which was clueless, to say the least. What I was doing before training.
Yeah, so, I mean, your words, not mine, we'll say. But yeah,
I own what I am.
Fair enough. Cool. I mean, and since then, even in just a few months with the Momentum program, you've hit a 365 deadlift, which was remarkably fast as well. Like, it looked like you had 400 in you on the day, at least with the bar speed.
Yep. Yeah, I basically picked the number at the start of what I was wanting to do, and then once I hit it, I stopped. And even it felt very, very manageable compared to, especially what other people were looking like when they were trying to hit their 1 reps. Mine did not look like a 1 rep.
most certainly did not. Yeah. and then a 300 squat as well. So definitely a contrast from where you'd started out. And like you mentioned a moment ago, there was no physio visit the next day or the day after.
No, definitely not. I was back into it. Actually, I think I did deadlifts and squats following day as well. So like I was pretty much straight into it. So I was very happy with that.
Awesome. So what were some of the big lessons, if you were to say, top couple takeaways for you from the past few months of training?
Bracing my core, I cannot understate how important that was. I still remember, like, one of the first training sessions, you're like, okay, activate your core. And I'm like, I am. And you're like, no, you're not. I'm like, well, then I don't know how to. And so activating my core for me was used to just like focus on my front and my abs rather than like bracing like fully around my body, which obviously, if I'm having back issues and I'm not at all providing support to my back, then that kind of makes sense in hindsight. Like, that one's definitely the deadlifts. There was like a very big portion of it was just like the mechanics of it as well. So I feel like back squats was like mechanically pretty close. The bracing definitely helped prevent the injuries, and then just some fine tuning. The deadlifts, on the other hand, was like, I felt like it was basically a complete rebuild of what I was needing to do. and how I was needing to move. Everything from like, again, fundamentally starting with like the bracing of the core and the body, but also just like how I move the bar up and down with my legs and getting the proper like hinging and levering sort of motion going. I fundamentally knew that I had to keep my back straight, but that's pretty, if like that's all you think of what when you're doing a deadlift, that's not necessarily going to make a very good deadlift, which mine was not. So like there was just a lot of, in my mind, just like a lot of technique building with some of the exercises, which really helped with the support of the bracing of the core to kind of hit those numbers. So
yeah,
I would say
100%. Yeah, I'd agree with your statement of it was pretty much a full rebuild on the deadlift, and squats we had a few less steps to do there.
Yeah. So like that was definitely like quite an eye opener, and like it helps. CrossFit does a lot less weight and a lot more volume. Like it does like a lot of volume with moderate weight. I mean, like earlier this year in the open, one of the exercises had like 100-ish deadlifts or something going at 225 pounds. 100, 1 through 10 through 1 as a ladder. And like I made it a fair decent way through that at 225, and I felt like I could do cartwheels and stuff afterwards. Like it was not a struggle at all. And that previously, like a couple of them would put me out for a day. So I was really happy with how that one panned out. So yeah, it's remarkable the difference, really.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I remember that. I remember you telling me about that deadlift day, and I was like, you know, some of the open workouts, I'll be honest, you know, as a powerlifting coach, I'm like, holy crap, man. Like I do 9 reps in a day on a competition. But, you know, then the follow-up to that is, yeah, but I was also fine. And I could do cartwheels after, and it was good. Like things have worked as planned. And I'm like, all right, cool. We've done what we need to do here.
Yeah, exactly. And like you test your 1 reps in CrossFit occasionally, but you test your 20 and 30 reps very frequently. So having the ability to kind of, I'm building up that 1 rep, but the ability to do the volume at a pretty good weight is just, it's like a load off your shoulders, really, when you don't have to really worry about how you're going to feel after doing it, because you can kind of just launch into it when you've got all of the techniques and stuff. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I was very happy with that. I remember that day. I was very happy that day.
Definitely. So let's say you come across somebody who's in a similar situation to where you were several months ago. They've had, you know, a bunch of low back problems. They're finding, you know, yes, I want to get stronger and stuff, but I'm kind of up against this wall here. What advice would you give them?
With lower back issues, get someone who knows what they're doing to actually have a look at what you're doing. Like realistically, I mean, you can have like more severe back issues than me, but if you've got like mild to moderate ones, like check your technique first and make sure that you're actually doing things properly. Yeah, get help basically would be what I would say, because it's kind of, I'm not saying it's impossible to figure out on your own, but it's just it's a much harder path than it needs to be, rather than asking for help and getting someone to really like yourself, obviously, to look at things properly. Because I don't feel like it took you particularly long to correct what I was doing wrong, and it took you very little time to identify what I was doing wrong, which admittedly was a lot. So
rich environment, right?
Yeah. So exactly right. So get help to look at the technique, and rather than avoiding it, like confront it and see if you can actually overcome it with some assistance. So
that makes perfect sense to me. Okay. Any final thoughts or things you want to add before we wrap up here?
No, nothing too much to add. I'm looking forward to seeing what my new 1 reps, I think we're going to have them come about in sort of 2 weeks time, if memory serves. So I'm looking forward to what those will be. I'm hoping if I hit that 400, that'll be close to doubling what it was. Well, probably 170% of what it was 6 months ago. So it'll be pretty good.
That's a good job.
Yeah, a pretty good job in a pretty short time. So yeah, I'm looking forward to what it'll be.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. Well, then I'd say we'll wrap up. So yeah, if you're watching this and this resonates with you, you're having similar issues, let's chat. Maybe drop a quick comment down in the chat, say, hey, coaching, and I'll get in touch and see if my team and I can help. Andrew, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. And
Of course, thank you for your
I'll
help.
catch you next week.
Catch up.
All right.